Hello guys, Ben146 here. Welcome to today's video. So we are continuing the coverage of the 2021 World Championship between Magnus Carlsen and Nepomniachtchi. I did mention at the end of the last video that I would be taking some time off due to certain other engagements, and so I wasn't able to bring the recaps for some of the days. Now my plan was to resume getting to the tail end of the tournament and then probably consider continue with the last 3 days, but then Magnus and Nepo had different plans, and so the match is already over. Unfortunately, one of the pre-match narratives came to pass that Nepo is prone to collapse if things don't go his way. He lost one game, very interesting, very tough game, and after that it seems he simply collapsed. Like there's no good way of putting it. After that he lost 3 out of like 5 games, and the match ended very prematurely on game 11, three games before the intended end. So what you're going to do today is you're going to take a quick look through the rest of the games, the decisive ones especially, and try and note the critical moments where Nepo blundered. So yeah, I mean, no spoiler alert, because if you don't know this already, then you probably shouldn't be watching this video. So we left off at game 4. Game 5 had Nepo as white. It was another Ray Lopez. He tried to break through Magnus's Marshall, but he couldn't, and it was a draw. Very solid. Now game 6 is one of the first ones that we'll take a look at. This was one of the most exciting games we've ever had in World Championship history. It was a very interesting game. Magnus was on the white side. He started 1d4 and played the Catalan type setup. I mean, we'll be covering many games, so we are not going to take too much time to look through each one. We are really only going to zoom to the critical moments. And this time he went for b3 rather than the typical c4, which is how you play a Catalan. So b3 doesn't really strive for significant advantage, but it just tries to take the game out of, the beaten waters and into more interesting territory. Nepo actually reacted very well to this opening. He played c5, they took, then Magnus continued with c4, he took on c4, Magnus played queen c2, pinning this pawn to the bishop so the pawn can't take. And so Nepo defended the bishop with queen e7, and here the normal thing would be to take back, and again you are sort of in normal waters, but Magnus decided to sacrifice the full pawn with knight bd2, inviting you to take this guy, and he's going to take back and sacrifice the pawn. That gives him a ton of play down this c file. He has active pieces, and all your active pieces gets pushed back. So Nepo decided not to go for it, which was correct. He went knight c6, the knight took on c4, b5, very sharp but very, very correct reaction from Nepo here. The knight came to e5, knight b4, queen b2, bishop b7. So Nepo actually equalized without too much difficulty out of this opening, and actually he was on the slightly better side of equality at the end of the opening. So knight d4, the knight took, and I mean you can easily see just by eyeballing the position that his pieces are super active, and white doesn't really have all that much. This is, you could say, the pawn structure is a bit weakened, but the king is not unsafe, because none of white's pieces is actually anywhere close to attacking it. Neither is white anywhere close to taking advantage of this pawn structure. So the game continued along equal terms until this critical moment. Nepo decided to play rook a to c8. I mean, not a wrong move, but then it changed the nature of the position significantly. Now, instead of a slightly equal position, slightly better for black, equal position, after this exchange where Magnus was basically forced to give up the queen for 2 rooks, the position became very imbalanced. It's still equal, slightly better for black, but now it's highly imbalanced. Now all 3 results are very, very possible. Queen d5, b4, a4, e3, bishop e5, h4. Very normal moves played thus far, but bishop b2 I believe was the first mistake. Rook c5 was the correct reaction. Queen d6, we're really going to those lines, but then rook c2 was supposed to be close to winning here for white, but Magnus missed the, I mean, it's a very computery line, to be fair. You have to see something like this. Doesn't make all that much, it's not that easy to see with a human eye. I mean, this stuff is kind of crazy. So Magnus continued with rook d1, the bishop took on a3, took on b5, queen d7, rook c5, e5, and Magnus continued to massage the position until a point where they entered neutral time trouble. So this move 39, and this is where they started making mistakes. I mean, both sides. So like e4 here was a mistake. Knight c5 here, knight takes e4 was a complete blunder. Actually, apparently winning was this move, rook d to c2, which paralyzes basically all of black's pieces. The queen cannot move because this guy is under attack, and this guy has no moves. So black will soon run out of moves and will be forced to probably give up the piece. But he missed it. He took on e4, queen b3, and they played on for a while. But soon it became clear that the position was much easier for Magnus to play, and Nepo eventually blundered. This was a very, very long game. So yeah, it's going to take a while for the critical moment to appear on the board, and we are getting kind of close. The first mistake was allowing Magnus to take here on a3. So the queen was, also defending that square, and so Magnus couldn't take. But Nepo kind of saw this idea of taking here and taking advantage of this pin on the pawn, and was a bit overexcited by it, because actually after king g1 it doesn't lead anywhere, and you actually have to waste a tempo getting your queen back. And now that pawn is gone, and the two rows can now focus on some of your weak points as black, and it's very difficult for you to defend them. So you absolutely need to keep that pawn there to maintain the balance. So now it becomes very difficult for black to hold. He tried his best, but Magnus, being Magnus, did what Magnus does best. Played on and on and on and on and on in a dead equal position until his opponent scrambled. And unfortunately, that moment did eventually come after many moves. Nepo had to give up the pawn on f5, and he did actually manage to create some threats, right? So here, after queen d3, he's attacking here on e3. And because of the double attack on these rooks, none of them can actually come and defend that point, because whenever any one of them moves here, so I mean, if you defend here with any one of them, bishop is going to take, and you can't take back because the other rook will hang. So after queen d3, Magnus was forced to give up one of the rooks for the bishop, which was the only slight wrinkle in the position, but he was up to the task. And the point is, at the end of this endgame is still very tough for black to hold. Now, of course, the engines will laugh at you and say 0-0-0 from like 50 moves ago, but yeah, over the board practically it's not easy. And actually, at some point after the one set of pawns came off, that will come soon, yeah, it actually became a table-based draw now. But yeah, it's very difficult to hold from a human perspective, and Nepo soon made a mistake, and Magnus took full advantage and reeled in the 4 points. So I believe the critical moment came here, when after king h3, you needed to stay on this diagonal, something like queen b1 or like a queen c2. There were some strange tactics having to do with staying on this diagonal, but Nepo played a more natural queen e6, and he actually loses on the spot. And Magnus again wasted no time converting, and in just a few moves the position was clearly obviously lost, and Nepo had to resign. This game was actually quite historic. It was the longest game in all of World Championship history, and at 136 moves, like ever since the 1880s somewhere, when he started playing World Championships. So yeah, and Magnus managed to win. So it was a tough game, lasted almost 8 hours. Really stretched them to their limits. Magnus showed his stamina. He has great stamina, that guy, and he rode in the points at the end. It wasn't a bad loss from Nepo. I mean, he didn't make a ton of serious mistakes. This was just Magnus doing what Magnus does best. And if Nepo had been someone with perhaps a bit more mental strength, he should have been able to recover, because up until this point he really was playing quite well in the match. But like I mentioned earlier, one of the pre-match narratives unfortunately came to pass in quite shocking fashion, which is that Nepo tends to collapse when things don't go well. So that was game 6. Game 7 was another game in which Nepo was white, another game in which it tried to attack Magnus's marshal, another game in which Magnus defended flawlessly, and the game ended in a fairly uneventful draw. Now in game 8, which is where we'll resume, Magnus is once again white. This time he goes for e4, and he plays into Nepo's Petrov. Now the first time he played the Petrov, I mean, he was trying to win, so he went down the main line, but this time he already has a game in hand. That's Magnus. He's won one game, so he doesn't need to win as urgently, and so he just plays something, and they get into a position that is very symmetrical. You can look at the d-file, I mean, everything is symmetrical. But after castles, Nepo breaks the symmetry with the move h5, quite aggressive, I should say. The idea is that many times this rook can come out this way, and you can maybe dream of attacking white's king in certain lines. Magnus here played queen e1 check. This is a move that's kind of invites a draw because the most logical response is queen e7 and the queens are going to come off, and these positions usually 99% of the time again between grandmasters will lead to a draw. Nepo, however, was feeling quite aggressive and decided to go king f8. Now it's also playable, but it's a lot risky. I mean, obviously the king is not as safe on f8. The rook doesn't join the battle as easily because, at least for now, you do have a bishop patrolling the h6 square, and so black would have some questions to answer regarding development soon. So Magnus continued bishop b4, traded off the dark square bishops, brought his rooks into the center, activated his queen. A couple of exchanges came, and up until now, Nepo had played fairly well. Everything was quite level. And here Magnus decided to strike with c4. He's slightly better, only slightly, but he's trying to change the pawn structure in a way that would be favorable to him. Nepo took the bait, took on c4, the bishop took back, and it's still quite level is the position. Magnus is slightly better because his bishop here is definitely better than that bishop, and he has control of the only open file. But Nepo isn't seriously worse and could easily defend this position. But again, he played a one move howler. This one wasn't as bad as some of the others that are coming up, unfortunately, but it still was a very bad plan, and the move was b5. He attacks the bishop. It's a kind of a typical move in structures that look like this, but here it doesn't work because of the existence of a very specific move by white, which is queen a3 check, which is what Magnus played. It's a check, and it also attacks this pawn on a7, and so you drop a pawn. But you may wonder, aren't you attacking something more valuable than a pawn? Yes, you are. And if you ask that, you missed what Nepo himself also missed, which is that after bishop queen takes a7, Magnus is also threatening the bishop. So you win a bishop, I win a bishop, and at the end of the day, I still have an extra pawn. So this move actually just dropped the pawn, and that's what Nepo said he missed, which is, I mean, it's very uncharacteristic for even a normal GM to miss something like this. But yeah, when Nepo is not in good form, that's the problem. He can be really bad. He can be really good. His ceiling can be just as good as Magnus's, but then his floor can be quite bad. And yeah, after king g8, he just took that pawn for nothing. Nepo dropped back with queen d8 to defend his bishop. I mean, this kind of endgame is hopeless. You already have such an outside pass pawn. I mean, it's completely winning. So he went queen d8. The bishop dropped back. Rook d6 was played. Rook e4, activating his rook, attacking stuff. Bishop e6, he traded those and then played queen c5. And he's a pawn up as white, but you also have, as black, have all these pawn weaknesses, and white has just one. Very easy to defend. So apart from being up a pawn, the position is still much favors white, and so his endgame is just completely winning. And once again, Magnus dispatched Nepo without much difficulty. He took all the pawns, and at the end of the day, still had his 2-pawn advantage, which he just started to threaten to push to victory. And now he wants to play this and that and that, and there's absolutely nothing that black can do against it. So Nepo tried to do something to complicate the position, but of course, Magnus was having none of it. And after queen f3, there were 0 threats left on the board, and Nepo resigned in game 8. So now Nepo is 2 games down, but still has like 6 games to go, right? So something could still happen if he could summon his reserves and try and play good chess still. At this point, something interesting happened. So Sergei Karyakin, who is a former World Championship challenger, very experienced grandmaster, and had been helping Nepo with the match, but was not on site in Dubai. He was all the way in Moscow. But then he took a flight right after the game 8. He took a flight and came down to Dubai to help out in person. And Nepo showed up for game 9. I think it was after a rest day with a new haircut, and with Sergei also joining was a sign that maybe he was ready to try something. So here he was white, and throughout the match he had played e4 and tried to attack Magnus's marshal, or in these Spanish type positions. But here he decided to change up and went for c4. So I mean, he wasn't getting anywhere with e4, so he decided to switch it up to c4. Magnus, of course, was well prepared, and so they entered the this line of the English. And actually, this is the opening out of which Nepo obtained his greatest advantage in the entire match. He played quite well out of the opening, and after knight c5, I mean, he's just slightly better. He has the famous Catalan bishop here on g2, very powerful, patrols the entire board. Whereas black still hasn't solved the problem of his bishop on c8. This knight isn't really doing anything, just waiting to be pushed back with h3. This knight isn't really doing much either. You'd really rather that pawn be pushed up the board rather than having that knight on c6. And white just has nicely coordinated pieces. Magnus continued with a3. And yeah, if Nepo had found a move before, he would have been doing very well indeed. The point that you have to see, of course, is that black cannot take here because of rook b1. And I mean, you can't keep on taking because queen d2 just traps the knight. And if you have to go back, then we take here and then you get the material back, and you are still in quite some trouble as black. So if Nepo had found a move before with the thought of just, I mean, going down the board and completely running black off the board, yeah, probably would have been a very interesting game where he would have very good chances. But he missed it. He just took the pawn on a3 instead. And Magnus played rook d8, the knight came back to b3, knight f6, then he took the pawn on a3. And much of white's advantage at this point had disappeared. Magnus found this very nice resource, rerouting the bishop to e8, where it's more useful. I mean, defends something, and at least it allows his rooks to become connected. He can complete development, and later on in the game, figure out what to do with that bishop. It's a fairly typical idea in some of these QGD structures. So queen e3, queen b4. The game continued quite level for a while. Nepo took on b7, rook a4. And again here, Nepo blundered. I mean, this is how most of the games, the decisive games in this match, were decided. It's not really a matter of Magnus playing brilliantly. It was in the first game that he won, but the rest of the games was just Nepo blundering. And it's not really that, I mean, he was under any serious pressure in those positions. It was just a mental collapse sort of, which is quite unfortunate. But what can you do? Okay, so Nepo played c5, and the problem with the move c5 is that this bishop is actually trapped on b7, and after the simple move c6, which Magnus found without too much difficulty, that bishop is actually just trapped and is soon going to be won by these rooks. So it's just a one move howler, and much like the other one, even in the previous game, after this blunder, it was just a pawn. He could still, I mean, he was completely lost practically though, but he could still play on for a while. This one is just completely done after this c6. I mean, it's already like -3. It's just completely done. So f3 knight is, he tried something, but then he can't defend the bishop, so he lost it, and tried to complete the position a little bit, but Magnus was up to the task, found everything he needed to find, stopped the pawn without any difficulty at all, and now the bishop is going to come here to help defend that point, and you are going to lose all these pawns. And Nepo resigned. So now Nepo is 3 games down. This is game 9, so there are only 5 games left in the match, and so practically speaking, everyone knew the match was over by this point. But still, he had to show up and play. I mean, and that's one thing that Nepo did well. To his credit, he did keep himself quite calm in public in spite of this match. He did not play well. He would not have been happy. I mean, of the press conferences, many of the questions that was being asked, but he managed to keep his calm quite well. I can imagine with Magnus in the same position, there would have been a lot of outbursts, and especially some of the questions they got asked at the press conferences there. Yeah, some of them were brutal. And a lot of them were criticized, but okay, I'll maybe talk about that a bit at the end. So game 10 was another game where Magnus was white. He played e4, played into the Petrov, and they drew without too much problems. By this point, he was a lot of games up, so every draw just brought him closer to victory. And the final game of the match was game 11. Once again, Nepo was white, Magnus was black. It was basically a must-win game for Nepo. He only had like 3 white games left, and he was already 3 points down. So I mean, if you want to try and come back, unlikely as it is, you have to try and win this game. So he went back to e4 after c4 didn't really work out in the previous game, and e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. This time he decided to go for an Italian, so he didn't go for the bishop b5 positions that he had been trying for. And after knight f6, they again went into a fairly typical position out of the Italian. Magnus here deviated with this move a5. It's not too common, and I mean, it's a common idea in the Italian, of course. Black goes a5 in a lot of lines, but not specifically here before castling and going something like h6. Those are the normal typical moves that you see. Rook e1, the bishop dropped back to a7 willingly, knight a3. All of these ideas are not new. And Nepo tried, but I mean, the position that he got out of the opening was still quite level. Magnus had managed to hold everything down. Rook a d1, knight e7, h3, queen d7. He decided to reroute his knights from h2 to g4, which is also a fairly typical idea in these Spanish type positions. But here it allows Magnus to play the free move d5, which is, and I mean, you can tell that all his pieces have been arranged to allow this move. And once this move occurs without any tactical issues for black, usually he has fully equalized, and that was the case here as well. But again, from Nepo's perspective, this was a must-win game, and so he had to make it. I mean, he had to try and make the position a bit crazier. So instead of just taking, he went d4. The pawn took on d5. Rook e4, queen c2, hitting the rook. Rook came to f4, and here what he should do is just take here, and things will get exchanged, and more things will get exchanged, and at the end of the day, you are going to have a completely level position, and you are going to draw in a few moves. That, however, would not be to Nepo's liking. He's down 3 games in the match. He has to win this game, so he decided to go for this move g3. It's a complete blunder, and black is completely winning after the move g3. That's a short version. The long version is that it seems he missed what he says he missed. Is that after the sequence f takes here, pawn takes here, which is what happened in the game, he expected Magnus to take here on f2 first, and that's all he calculated. And after queen f2, queen g4, queen g2 is actually a draw, and he had seen this and he was right. But what he had missed is that after g takes, Magnus doesn't have to take here first. He can first take on g4, and this is completely winning. This is like already -8. It's game over. There's no way to protect this king. And again, it's shocking that he missed this, but that's, I guess, the difference between these two players. Nepo can match Magnus at his best, but at his worst, it's not even close. And after king f1, queen h3, king g1, Magnus actually didn't play the most critical line. The most critical line was e takes here, queen takes, and just rook d6. And the rook is coming here, and there's absolutely nothing that white can do to stop it. It's just game over. This would probably have forged resignation on the spot. But Magnus went knight f5 and took some time converting the position, but the position was never in any doubt. He didn't give Nepo any chances, and he went into this endgame where he's a pawn up, and he also has an outside pass pawn. So although it's a rook endgame, he's completely winning without much difficulty. Magnus converted, so that pawn on the h4 simply cannot be stopped. Now that he tries to stop it, he loses all his other pawns, and this was a nice touch with check distracting the rook from protecting against the queen, and soon Nepo was forced in this position to resign. And the World Championship 2021 came to an end after game 11, with Magnus winning by a score of 7.5 to 3.5, winning 4 games out of, I think, the last 6. Nepo collapsing in quite spectacular fashion. Thoughts? No one really liked to see the way this match ended, to be fair. The first half, albeit a bit boring, was still interesting, and what we would have wanted was more decisive games like the game we had in game 6. You know, tough, exciting, going all the way to the end. But yeah, what can you say? It's not easy playing against Magnus, it should be pointed out. You know, facing him off in a long match like this, it can be quite a strain on the senses, and with the remarkable preparation that they all have to do, you're kind of working on eggshells. Something small goes wrong, and you know, it can collapse in spectacular fashion. So it's unfortunate, but again, it only speaks to the genius that is Magnus Carlsen. I mean, he's by far the best player there is in the world, and yeah, I mean, he plays the best chess that has ever been played. As whether he's the greatest champion of all time, remains to be seen. But I think by the end of his career, he will probably maybe even objectively be the best there has ever been. Because I mean, it's a question that's very difficult to answer objectively. I mean, it really just depends on what people think. But yeah, year in year out, he's proven that in all aspects of the game. I mean, be the chess itself, the preparation, even the commercial, financial aspects of it, popularizing it. I mean, he has no weaknesses. He's just the best that's ever been at almost everything. Yeah, he is he's an all-time great, and it's a pleasure living his generation and watching these matches. But yeah, this game at the end was not balanced, but it all depended on that one game 6. You know, if it had gone only slightly differently, we could have actually been looking at a very different headline right now. But that's how the chips fall. And like they say, chess is a game played on 64 squares, and at the end of the day, Magnus Carlsen wins. Thank you very much for tuning in for these recaps. Apologies that we missed the critical part of the match. That really couldn't be helped, but what can you do? At least we have these games to look back on and enjoy. Catch you later. I'll be coming your way soon with some more classical game analysis. Hope to see you there for that. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment, drop a like. Enjoy your chess. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment, drop a like. Happy chessing, and I'll see you later.